Welcome to the Wildlife Wire. I'm Mark Searles,
And I'm Samantha Miller.
and this is your source for wildlife news and the people that make it.
Welcome to the Wildlife Wire. Today's guest is David Niels. He's been tracking wildlife since he was 6 years old, growing up in the remote forests of Libby, Montana. What started as a deep curiosity about the hidden lives of wild animals has grown into a lifelong commitment to understanding and tracking apex carnivores, especially mountain lions, which Mark and I love mountain lions. After a close encounter with a male mountain lion in Colorado's Never Summer Wilderness, David dedicated himself to studying this elusive species. Over the past 20 years, he's spent countless hours in mountain lion habitat, developing a system to accurately map their activity across the western United States, Canada, and Chile. He now offers one-on-one mountain lion workshops for those interested in applying what he's learned from over 30,000 hours in the field. Through Wild Nature Media, David captures stunning, completely wild footage. No lures, no dogs, no helicopters, no tricks. Just raw, unscripted moments that we can celebrate the wild that we crave. Welcome to the podcast, David. It's so good to have you here.
Well, thank you. That was a beautiful intro.
Oh my gosh. Well, we are just thrilled that you're here. Your experience is so extraordinary and so different than a lot of the guests that we've had on the podcast so far. I had alluded a bit to the evolution of your journey, starting with curiosity. And I'm curious about what role your parents played in shaping your love and curiosity for nature.
I believe, it was my mother that realized early on, as soon as she bought me a bike, a one-speed Schwinn Typhoon, and which cost $20 brand new at the hardware store. And that gave me freedom to get farther from my house and actually ride some of these trails where I could see tracks. And so I learned tracks of wild animals as a little kid. And I remember seeing my first mountain lion track and learned early on that, the front track is asymmetrical compared to the back track. It's wider than it is long, typically doesn't show claw marks. And I just wanted to learn, what I could. And I was young. I didn't really have backcountry safety skills yet. So myself and a few friends worked on that for several years. And by the time I was 11, I was allowed to go into the Cabinet Mountains Wilderness area for days at a time, up to 10 days by myself, no adults. I saw a grizzly bear stand up in the moonlight in front of me. I mean, just crazy things for a kid. I wasn't even a teenager yet. Today, social services would have taken me away from my family for child abuse.
If they could have found you.
But
Yeah, they'd
but
have to
I'm
find you
so
out there.
glad that I had that freedom, and it really informs and shapes probably 80% of what I do now, at age 65.
Yeah, both Sam and I have 7-year-old children, and there is always that constant pull and tug of giving them as much freedom as you can and let them explore, whether it's in the yard or beyond, and then also making sure that they're safe and not getting in trouble with other folks. So it really amazing that you were able to have that experience and that your parents trusted you to go out and come back all in one piece.
Yeah, there was a calendar. I'll end with this. There was a calendar on the refrigerator, and I could put my backpack on in the kitchen and leave from our house. Nobody had to drive me anywhere. The trails into the wilderness were that close to our house, and there was a calendar on the refrigerator, and I would put 3 X's across 3 days, indicating the window of time I was coming back. I would give my parents a 3-day window.
I still kind of do that with my parents, David. So it's totally understandable. Except for now, we do it with the Garmin. Now they have advanced technology where they can ping me if they feel very concerned about my backcountry adventures. But it's such a cool way to grow up, and I hope that Mark and I are instilling some of that sense of adventure and curiosity in our kids. You were surrounded by so much wildlife, and of all the species around you, you really focused in on mountain lions. Why lions?
Well, growing up in Libby, I was fascinated by all three. I saw all three, wolves and grizzlies and mountain lions growing up there. But when I moved to Colorado, we didn't have grizzlies and, very few wolves, but plenty of mountain lions. So I thought, well, and it's more open country here. It's just easier to see. I love the alpine country, and there were enough wild places where there was not access by ATVs, four-wheel drives, or horses. I knew I could see and experience, completely wild behavior of wildlife that was not influenced by human activity. And that was really exciting to me to have these places within an hour or two of Fort Collins or Loveland.
I agree. Like oftentimes people pick their animal of interest primarily by accessibility, right? And so, that's one reason that I fell in love with coyotes is because you can, if you live in, well, pretty much anywhere in America now, you're pretty close by a coyote, and you can get out there and experience them. And so, when did it change from going out and looking for signs of lions to being very dedicated, putting out camera traps, and I know you have a wealth of knowledge on weather pattern, how to read where a lion would be before you even get there. So when did that change? And I would love to hear you talk a little bit about how you scope out your next area to look for lions.
Okay, those are good. Those are good questions. When I was face bumped by a mountain lion in the Never Summer Wilderness, that's when I made the decision that I would lean in and I would spend a significant amount of time learning about their behavior. And
David,
Yeah,
you have to go
can
back. You
yeah,
were
yeah.
face bumped. You have to
I
tell the
was like,
face
where am I
bump
gonna
story.
stop this before?
No, we can't proceed now. So you were,
yeah, so I
how?
was I was bow hunting for elk. I
Uh-huh.
was I was up there for 3 days, and that first night, it was super windy, and I did not get much sleep. Well, in the morning, I could hear these elk bugling up on this ridge, and I ate a Cliff Bar, I had a cup of coffee, and grabbed my pack, and I put a bunch of food in because I knew I was gonna be very hungry at lunchtime. So I headed out. I got close to some elk, no shot opportunities, and then I ate a big lunch and I could barely keep my eyes open. So I thought I better take a nap. So I found this beautiful spot, and like Crocodile Dundee, I can, as long as I have a slightly horizontal space, I can sleep anywhere. And Jenny, in fact, jokes that can fall asleep in less than 13 seconds, and that's true.
I'm envious of you in more ways than one now.
Yeah.
Yes. And I was laying with my head on my left arm on my side so that I wouldn't, if I laid on my back, I would snore and wake myself up. So I'm laying in the fetal position. I'm in camo clothes. And this lion saw me, and it was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon at 11,000 feet, right at timberline. And while I was asleep, came up to my backside, stuck his head over this shoulder, high shoulder, and pushed on this cheek with his muzzle. And it was like somebody had a wet hand and pushed on your face. That's what it felt like. And I sat up and I saw this flash run off behind me. I didn't see the animal really clearly, but I knew it was something large. It ran off. I'm still groggy. I'm waking up. And then I look over and there's a beautiful, 4-inch wide track right next to me with the claws extended down into this wet mud. And I knew that was a male and a large male. So I got up and grabbed my pack and my bow, and I looked off into Porcupine Creek to the west and Silver Creek to the east. I didn't see the lion again. And I just decided, wow, I mean, who gets face bumped by a mountain lion?
that mountain lion was saying, "Hey, buddy, I'm kind of an expert on hunting deer and elk, and you're never gonna get one while you're sleeping."
Yeah, yeah,
Time
maybe.
to wake up and pay attention.
Yeah. Or maybe, he thought, wow, this guy's from Montana. I'm sure the meat would just be stringy and tough. There's no reason attacking this mammal. In fact, when you're by yourself, you have these crazy thoughts. And the first crazy thought I had was, well, why didn't it attack me? And then I thought, well, I haven't showered for 2 days. Maybe his mom told him you should never eat a carcass that has started to turn.
That that's definitely a possibility, and it does also raise another important point too. So you were a longtime bow hunter, and that's how you really had some of your first experiences in the wild, and definitely how you got face bumped by a mountain lion, as we've learned. As someone who's hunted, what are the similarities and differences you see between hunting for photos of animals and hunting for animals in today's Colorado?
Well, if you want to be successful, I hunt, with a recurve or a longbow. So I I need to be within 20 yards. So you have to be in close, and to get in close, you know, you, you know, let's say I'm hunting elk, and an elk will put up with noise. It'll put up with maybe catching a glimpse of you visually, but it'll never put up with your human scent. It'll turn inside out and explode out of there. So, I learned that these animals use their nose defensively and offensively, and, along with all the predators. So I I read this book by Fred Asbell called Stalking and Still Hunting, and there's a great chapter in there about air currents. And a lot of the mistakes I made early on hunting elk here in Colorado were corrected by that chapter. I would chalk it up to squirrely wind or whatever, but I was the one making the mistake, and and I learned a lot, and I was able to apply that to mountain lions. And when I spent the first 4 winters after I was face bumped following their tracks in the snow, and I started to see patterns related to air currents. Like this animal is spending a lot more time hunting cold air drainage, air currents, than anything else. That's interesting. Why? Why during a low pressure do I see very little activity of predators or prey? That's interesting. Must be a reason. Well, I've learned over time there are reasons for all of these things. And if going back to your question, Mark, if I'm exploring a new area, the very first thing I do is cut a stick, tie some frayed, unwaxed dental floss off the end of that stick, fray it on my pant leg to spread the fibers, and I learn the air currents of that landscape. And that gets me 80% of the way there. I'm way ahead by learning those and spending the time to do that. And we are so fortunate in the West, and maybe especially in Colorado, to have these vast areas where you can explore on or off trail and learn. And we have abundant wildlife here to study.
So with those air currents and going out there and seeing what's happening, like, to me, that I have no experience in doing that. One, where did you get that connection as you're actually in the field and you are witnessing these air currents? Was that something that you had read about, or did you kinda just evolve into it as, "Oh my god, this is the thing," and then I imagine that's beyond mountain lions, that's a whole other skill set and study area as far as meteorology goes and things like that, right?
Yeah, I think those first 4 winters, following the tracks in the snow, one of the things that I learned, I didn't know why initially, but I saw that probably the most important thing actually that I learned about mountain lions in these 21 years. A mountain lion will never give up the most downwind part of an edge because they they are an obligate carnivore. They can only digest meat. They have established territories, and their prey are herd animals, which, when pressured, will move out of the area. And it's like having all the grocery stores in your county close. And then let's say you don't get along with people in the neighboring county, so you have to fight them to go to their grocery store. So you could be injured or killed just getting a carton of eggs.
Sam deals
That,
with that all the time up in
that's the
Grant
way it
County.
is. That's
Yeah.
the way it is with mountain lions. If they have to go into another mountain lion's territory to hunt, that puts them at great risk. And they, so they have this very narrow niche in order to secure food. Very different than, let's say, a bear that's an omnivore that can eat both plant material and meat and berries, and they have more things to eat than killing an animal. And another thing that makes it a small niche, a mountain lion is not a scavenger, unless I've seen where the snow is really deep and there was a deer hit along the highway, and I've seen where mountain lions have pulled that deer out away from the highway up into the woods. But you don't see that very often. They're finicky, and they prefer to only eat what they kill. They're not scavengers by nature. So this is one of the things that makes them much more predictable in how they hunt and navigate than, let's say, a coyote or a fox or even a bobcat.
Yeah, you talked a bit about how mountain lions hold these vast territories really so they can hunt without having to fight off other mountain lions. Right now in Colorado, how are we managing mountain lions? Are we managing them based on these large territories and their ecosystem benefits? Or are we managing them for different reasons? Can you tell us a bit about how mountain lion management is working in Colorado and some things that you might want to see changed?
Okay. Well, I'll start with the
Okay, it's a
positive.
long story. I'm ready,
All right.
David.
Let me get my
We're
pen
ready.
out.
I'll start with the positive.
Okay.
Back in the 1960s, in 17 Western states, mountain lion status changed from vermin to big game animal. Now, the common citizen, had to have a license to kill a mountain lion. And because mountain lions are elusive, they rebounded. Hooray for mountain lions. Now, in 2025, the hunting of mountain lions is a recreational opportunity only. It is not necessary to hunt mountain lions to control their numbers. I don't want to use the term self-regulate because that's oversimplified. But hunting is not necessary to control their numbers. And we have great data to support this. Places like Yellowstone Park, where Yellowstone Park has not become overrun with mountain lions. When you ask people, what animal are you really looking forward to seeing when you go to Yellowstone? Nobody says mountain lions. They hope to see a grizzly, and they hope to see a wolf, and they may be interested in some birds. But if you asked 100 people, it would be rare that even 1 out of 100 would say mountain lion. So here you have a place where no hunting is allowed. There's plenty of prey, and the population has not exploded. Mountain lions, the mountain lion population is controlled by competition. If there's a hard winter, male mountain lions will kill each other for competition. Mountain lions' kittens are sometimes killed by a dominant male in the area to put the female back in estrus. So, in fact, I found a kitten no longer than my hand just laying in the snow where a male had attacked the female, and I caught her on camera a few days later, and she was limping really bad. It was obvious what happened, and the temperatures were, at night were below 20 below zero, 27 below. So that it was obvious that the kitten unfortunately had died from exposure, and these things are just going to happen in the wild. So did that answer your question about, I
Well, we
believe
haven't talked about what we would change yet, David, but I might ask you another question about management from this perspective. Let's say I'm down in Boulder and I'm thinking, oh no, if we stop hunting mountain lions, they'll eat my children and my Pomeranian. Is that the case? If we were to stop hunting mountain lions, would we then all be losing our children and pets to mountain lions, or would they continue to balance themselves based on that territory need?
Well, that's a good question. And, we, as a society, we have feared these apex predators. There's something in our DNA that, you know, we want to see them. We're like a moth to a flame, right? We want to see them, but we don't want them to kill us.
Right.
Uh, Swim with sharks, we do all these crazy things. No, they would not overpopulate. And I have a great clip of my friend Mike walking across the hillside in Lyon, Colorado, to check a wildlife guzzler, and there was a female lion and a juvenile. The the female lion's head was blocked by a tree, so she couldn't see Mike, but the juvenile was laying on the ground facing Mike, and when that juvenile lion, and Mike didn't know that the lions were there. They were about 50 yards away. When that juvenile lion saw Mike, it turned around and got out of there as fast as possible. So mountain lions, they don't want to be near humans. And typically, if you have a human lion encounter, it's almost always a juvenile male that's trying to establish territory. Somebody may be feeding deer. Maybe they have bird feeders out. Deer love bird feeders, or worse yet, they may be feeding deer intentionally with corn in their yard, and causing a concentration of deer where there may not be a concentration otherwise. And I mean, if I was a juvenile mountain lion, I'd much rather hunt deer that's conditioned to humans, that has no fear, right? That is not wary. I mean, those deer are super easy to pick off, and whether it's on a golf course or near homes. So there are things people can do to, minimize wildlife. It's not it's not cool to see a deer in your yard. It's a 911 call to somebody. Like, this isn't natural. And there's a reason why the first four letters of wildlife are wild.
Right.
You don't go out into the woods to see tame life. Nobody signs up for a tame life tour, right? Or a tame life hike. So seeing elk on the street in Estes Park or on the golf course, that just makes me sad. This is not something to celebrate. But you have to understand that there's other elk out there that would never put up with your human scent or presence. Those are wild elk. The elk in Estes Park are not wild. They've been conditioned to humans for a long time, and that puts them out of balance. It puts the ecosystem out of balance. The more wild an ecosystem is, the more imbalanced it is.
So on the elk side of things, do you think that that elk like that are found in Estes Park or in Evergreen lounging on golf courses, do you think that they are using us as kind of a safety net and saying, well, lion probably isn't going to come around these people, so I'll put up with their shenanigans to keep lion away?
Well, they definitely take advantage of it. I don't think wildlife view it as shenanigans. They view it as Kentucky bluegrass. You bet.
Right?
If I have to choose between eating cheatgrass and Kentucky bluegrass, I'm going for the bluegrass, right? And and hunters know this. As soon as that first rifle shot happens, elk and deer pile onto the private land where they can escape the Orange Army.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to go back though, because we haven't fully discussed how mountain lions are managed in Colorado. We've talked a bit about what they do and about their behaviors. And I'd love for you to discuss a bit with our listeners how mountain lions are managed here and in a lot of states across the West.
Yeah, if you if you do spend time listening to wildlife commission meeting, you can learn how mountain lions are managed and what the focus is. And it really is for any animal that a tag is bought for, whether it's hunting or trapping or fish. Do the focus is always, do we have enough of this species? Now I'm talking about hunting and trapping. Do we have enough of this species on the landscape for hunters and trappers to kill? In this case, hunters. We don't trap mountain lions. And and the data the data available is based on primarily habitat that for the prey species that mountain lions are dependent upon. In Colorado, that would be deer and elk. So there is a statistical relationship between the number of mountain lions an area can hold and the amount of prey. I've seen, now this is just an estimate on my part, territories for a male lion as small as 30 square miles. The research will tell you on average in the West, it's 100 square miles. Talking to researchers in Utah, there are places where the territorial boundary of a mountain lion includes 1,500 square miles.
Wow.
One lion. I mean, that's a lot of country to cover in order to secure food.
Wow.
Here, it's especially along the Front Range. I think it's much much smaller. The focus is, do we have enough of these animals on the landscape to continue killing them? And as I shared with somebody recently, and this is just the way, I'm not pointing a finger just at CPW, it's the way state agencies in the West are. If you go out to their website and you just do a tally on each page, try and be fair, no bias. Does this page, is it focused on the killing of wildlife or the welfare of wildlife? And what you'll find with CPW is that over 85% of the pages are focused on the killing of wildlife. I, as a sportsman, as a wildlife conservationist, have a problem with that. If I'm giving somebody money to manage a living organism, a forest, a river, soils, an airshed, or a wildlife species, I should expect that that living organism, whatever it is, should benefit from my investment. That is not the case with mountain lions. That is not the case with bobcats. That is not the case with any of the fur bear species, most of which have unlimited trapping. These are things that must change, and I and these animals are part of the public trust. And I think if you asked 100 people, do you believe that the welfare of wildlife should be the focus of Colorado Parks and Wildlife as they manage wildlife in our state? I think most people would say, well, yeah,
Yeah, I think they
yeah,
would
that makes
assume
sense.
they already do that. I think the one of the greatest misconceptions, and I know that even for myself learning this was hard and different, was that I thought state agencies growing up, I thought state agencies took care of wildlife, they were managing for wild animals, but really they manage for humans' interest in wild animals and the value that they can put on each species, which is usually by selling tags for hunting or fishing licenses, which is it's an interesting thing to learn because it's just such a misconception. It's right there in the name, and we love to trust folks in a green uniform with a badge. And I think that most of the employees really do get into it for conservation, but at the end of the day, agencies like Colorado Parks and Wildlife are enterprise agencies. They are there to make money, and they make money by selling tags.
Yeah, and I had a conversation with a district wildlife manager from CPW. I won't mention his name, about they were doing, bighorn sheep research. I met them along the Front Range, talking about that, and then I asked him. I said, "So, tell me, why are you now allowing for unlimited tags for black bears on private land in northern Colorado?" And his response was, and it sounded just like this: "Oh, we got too many bears."
I
Like he
believe that guy.
like he had
If he sounds like that, I'm like, okay, I guess we
Yeah,
got.
I guess we have too many bears.
"Oh, we
Very
got too many
scientific.
bears."
Yeah.
Okay, then
Was he in fact a bear?
so then I changed the subject back to bighorn sheep, but 10 minutes later I circled back to black bears. So how many bears do we have in area B3, which is a bear management unit, you know, between Boulder and the Wyoming line? And he said, "We don't know."
There's too many though.
I said, "You don't know? 10 minutes ago you said, 'We got too many bears.' And now you're telling me you don't know?"
It
I
was a
have a
vibe.
problem with that.
He had a vibe that there was too many bears there. So
Yeah, just a sense.
Well, I said, "The only thing that you've exposed is your anti-predator position.
yeah,
And as a wildlife professional, as for me as a hunter, I expect more from you."
right.
And then I said, "I expect that the welfare of black bears should be your primary focus in managing bears." And he said, "Oh no, we don't manage bears that way."
Oh.
I said, "Oh, really? What are your primary objectives?" And he said two things. One, hunter satisfaction. Two, reducing human bear conflict. I said, "Well, okay. Last year there were 375 human bear conflicts logged in Colorado. You gave out 4 citations to humans, and over 99% of those human bear conflicts were caused by human problems. Why are you not giving out more citations?" And he said, I mean, he was just being very honest. He said, "Bears can't vote."
Oh. Well, there we have it. That kind
There
of
we have it.
just
That
sums
is
it up.
true, but I guess we'll spoil it. Sam, should we spoil it now?
What?
2028, we're doing a ballot initiative to get bears the right to vote.
Yes. Yeah, everyone take note. Come 2028, the bears will have their voice. I want to switch gears a little bit
I
here,
know,
if that's okay. Oh, go
I
ahead, Mark. You may
no,
make more bear voting
no,
jokes.
no,
Yes.
no, no. I also want to switch gears, and I will let you do that.
Okay.
I just wanted to state
Thank you
for
for
the.
letting me.
Yeah, you're welcome. I just wanted to state for the record that I will miss this segment and his impersonation of that CPW officer. So, uh, he will forever live in my memory. So go on to the next segment.
thank, thank you, Mark, for that. And I just wanted to switch gears a bit because there are a lot of really good things we can do with this information. And it can be so frustrating to hear, like, we're just managing bears for hunter satisfaction. They can't vote. Well, what can we do about it beyond joining my and Mark's faux upcoming ballot initiative to give bears the right to vote? David does some really cool things around wildlife and education of the public and different ways that folks can engage. And I would love for you to share with our listeners a little bit about your workshops and your wildlife conservation projects and something about the people that are attending these projects too.
Oh, well, thank you. We'll get back to the positive. Thanks for clawing me back in a positive direction.
Pulling everyone back. We're all back on track. We're going to channel this frustration towards advocacy and action.
Yeah, great. So, yeah, of all the work that I've done in the last several decades, I think it's these small conservation projects that are funded by and implemented by the public. And I prefer to support landowners like Susan Jessup and her brother David at Sylvandale Guest Ranch, who have 75% of their land holdings in a conservation easement, either through Colorado Open Lands or the county, Larimer County. And that decision that they made is a gift to all of us in terms of protecting wildlife habitat, riparian areas. It's always a work in progress. Working with ranchers, I'll say that, but these places are really important, and they're unique along the Front Range. I mean, the amount of money those ranch owners could make by subdividing is insane. I mean, millions and millions of dollars. And they're choosing not to do that, to have this land remain as is long after they're gone. And so I feel like we, the public, benefit from this and we should support them. And it's great to have people like myself and others that have wildlife knowledge, habitat knowledge, forestry knowledge to support these landowners. Many times they don't have a wildlife background. They run horses and cattle. You know, they're a dude ranch or they're just a working ranch. And typically the conservation easement has specific regulations in that easement, the requirements that they have to meet regarding watershed and forests and wildlife. And so helping them meet those while engaging the public. And I'll just give you an example. So we put in a wildlife friendly fence. It was only, several hundred yards, wasn't very long, but it was really critical at the mouth of this gulch.
And can we just dive in for the folks who don't know what makes a fence wildlife friendly?
Sure. Yeah, a wildlife friendly fence. The fencing projects that I've been on, typically you have a smooth wire that you can stretch really tight on the top and bottom. The top strand is between 38 and 42 inches off the ground, preferably closer to 38. This allows for elk and deer to easily clear it. It's more of an issue with elk. And I've seen where they were put in, incorrectly. And let's say the top strand was 44 inches instead of 40, and elk are running back and forth along that fence, nervous to cross it. You drop it 4 inches and they have no trouble jumping over it. So this is important, allowing for organic wildlife movement on the landscape. The bottom strand is 15 to 18 inches off the ground, also smooth, and female deer, young, those that don't have antlers, will go under it as much as they will jump it. A deer has no trouble clearing that fence, but many times they'll go under it. And then all the other animals, especially pronghorn, they will go under it and they will not it doesn't create a human topographic pinch point for predators, to run animals along a fence line. They can get through that fence line. And then the other important, the middle strands are typically barbed wire, 2 or 3, and the distance between the top wire and the next one should be a minimum of 8 inches. That ensures that when an animal jumps it, their hoof doesn't get caught on that second barbed wire strand and get hung on the fence. And you go over to Maybell, Colorado, and especially along the river between Maybell and Rock Springs, and you'll see skeletons of deer and elk that got hung on the fence all over the place. It's horrible. And so this is, that's something that can be done. And this particular project that we put in was in April of 2020 when the pandemic was taking off. And my friends told me, this is a horrible time to ask people to help. People are losing their jobs. It's crazy. Why don't you wait? Well, nobody knew it was going to take 2 years, right, for this thing to blow over. I said, no, I'm going to do it now. I'll accept the rotten tomatoes. And, I had spent November and December getting ready for this. We still needed $2,800 for the fencing materials and gloves for people to wear. And and I needed 35 people to tear out the old fence and put the new one in over 2 weekends. So I created a PayPal button to accept the funds. We received all the funds in 15 minutes.
Incredible.
Half the money came from a single donor, a lady in Malaysia,
Wow.
for a project here in Colorado. I thought it was a mistake. I thought she was probably ordering something on Amazon. She fell asleep, her head hit the keyboard, and she sent us money by mistake. But no, I followed up and she said, "Oh, I can't be there. I've been following your work for a long time and I just wanted to help." And I said, "Well, you paid for half the materials." She said, "Oh, that's okay. Just keep me on your list." I will definitely keep you on our list. And and people signed up to help. And we were digging these fence post holes by hand in rocky ground. It was not easy work. People signed up at 1 a minute.
Wow.
In less than 45 minutes, we had all the money and all the volunteers.
That's incredible,
That's exciting.
right? Um, yeah, it
And
showed.
then I had to deal with all this hate mail the rest of the day by people that didn't get the email in time and they couldn't sign up. I with these type of projects, you almost have to hire a conservation bouncer to keep people behind the fence that want to help.
Oh, I like that. That's a new area, conservation bouncer. And
Conservation bouncer, yes. I may hire one of those. And people. Now, I'll end with this. We put the fence in within 24 hours. Deer and elk were using it successfully. I always record that. I always have cameras up, and I get that footage back to the sponsors, back to the people that showed up and physically did the work, usually within 48 hours of when the project's done. That is key. And people know that this work is making a difference and they want to stay on the list, and then they share it with their friends who end up subscribing to help with future projects. Now, why are these projects successful? I used the structure of the Ice Bucket Challenge to raise money for ALS. It's like, why did that work? Well, all you had to do was dump a bucket of ice water over somebody's head and they were going to donate. So it was super clear what the goal was and how it was going to be accomplished. Same with these projects. And what the results were. And the results were immediate. So you want to do projects, whether it's ideally wildlife guzzlers, wildlife friendly fencing. There's thousands of miles of wildlife friendly fence that could be done. And people, they want to help. And it creates this environment that I call active education, where people are learning, okay, about deer and elk and other animals that are going to use this fence. They're learning about them while making a difference for them. The stickiness is enormous. It's much different than just going to a presentation or going to somebody's website.
And so in those projects, and when you're talking about the stickiness of learning out there, is it conversational? Is there a general plan for discussion as you're building? Like how does all that work?
Yeah, we're just out there organically talking, and then they received footage of deer and elk struggling, using that fence line before, and then they saw what it was like afterwards. And one of the best examples of this is there was a girl, 6 years old, carried water on her back, a gallon, so 8 pounds, up to a natural basin up the gulch, about 3/4 of a mile. And we filled that basin, 120 gallons. The ranch owner thought I was crazy to ask people to put water on their back. And it was 1,000 pounds of water. That's 120 gallons. And so this girl, when she got back to the parking lot, Susan Jessup was there and asked the girl how old she was. And he said, "Did you haul water for bears?" "Yes, I did." And she said, "That's amazing. Really, why did you come today?" And the girl said, "I came for two reasons. One, I wanted to learn more about bears, and I wanted to help bears." I mean, it's that simple.
Easy.
And then she put her mom on the spot, this little girl, and she said, and I had to talk my mom into coming because I can't drive yet. And then her mom said, well, I enjoyed it too, It was a cute, scene there. And as that girl was walking back to her car with her mom, I turned to Susan and I said, this whole thing was worth it for that little girl's experience. Yes, we're going to help bears by providing it, but the whole thing was worth it for that little girl's experience. She will never think the same about bears again. She will be a wildlife advocate the rest of her life.
Yeah, I think that's so important, David. And for folks that let's say we can't drive, and we've got listeners that want to learn more about these kinds of workshops and look at your photography, how can folks find you? Where can they find you?
Yeah, the best place is, my website, wildnaturemedia.com. And if you have any, I would suggest just subscribing. There's a subscribe button. I don't sell anything to anybody. Your information is secure. And I'll just let you know, usually every few months, what's going on about new projects. I have people contacting me all the time saying, when is the next project, And we're going to actually be doing some maintenance on that fence that I told you about, either this summer or early in the fall. But we'll have some other ones related to the fire, the Alexander Mountain fire, and maybe some other properties too. So if anybody that's listening to this, if you know of a landowner in Colorado that has a conservation easement that would like this type of assistance, please reach out to me, and I would love to discuss that with you and look for ways to support it. It's the demand by the public is always viral. There's demand to pay for it and implement it. That I know.
Yeah, well, I'm hooked. I know that I'm going to try to sign up for one of your future workshops and building projects. I know Sam and I worked on some fencing together up near her, and so yeah, I mean, it is really rewarding work when you can get out there, and especially since you're delivering that product at the end, saying these are the animals that are able to clear that fence or go under that fence successfully.
Right. And the little girl that hauled the water. So the next morning, a sow, black bear, and 2 cubs came down. Now, before we put water in, there was only, a glass of water in that basin, barely. And now it was 120 gallons. And the sow came down and she looked at the surface of the water and put her paw out and tapped it like, is this real? And then drank, and her cubs drank. And then she looked around and she just rolled into it and laid on her back.
Yeah. Hot tub.
Yeah.
That was the first footage.
Oh, that's amazing.
With her cubs swimming around her in that basin. That's what I shared within 24 hours.
Incredible.
Wow.
That's, and there was one boy, this was in the fall, and I asked him why he came, and he's a 5th grader in Fort Collins. And he said, we're studying climate change, and it's so depressing. And I just wanted to do something. And maybe these bears don't have as much water as they did in the past because of climate change. That's why I came today. I was choked up. I couldn't even talk. I just gave him a big hug.
Oh.
And thanked him for coming.
Yeah, no, I think that's so great. And I mean, I just love what you do, David. And I think getting kids out there and experiencing nature is so important. And doing these kinds of service projects while they can learn about wild animals is a great way to reach kids. So thank you for all of your work. And thank you for joining us on Wildlife Wire today.
Well, thank you. It was quite an honor.
Thanks, David. This has been an episode of the Wildlife Wire with me, Mark Searles, and my co-host, Samantha Miller. Thank you for listening.